Rewind a bit back to when the news was breaking about Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia coming to an end, and everyone is all over the place, congratulating the respective series for their incredible runs, talking about the impact they had, how many people they reached, how they've cemented their legacies. But the biggest talking point was who's gonna follow up after them. Which series will take their spots at the top of the mountain? You know, My Hero and JJK, who stood side by side with a series like One Piece in the Shonen Jump magazine, who's good enough to take their place? Names like Sakamoto Days and Dandadan were being thrown around a lot, even though both those manga already had well over 150 chapters at the time. Sakamoto's actually just hit 200, but their respective animes were just around the corner, which would be huge. The Dandadan anime was a big hit, and Sakamoto Days is still currently airing on Netflix. The main name being brought up in this discussion was undoubtedly Kagurabachi, which I fully agree with. It's the easiest answer to give, and there were probably many others being mentioned that I didn't see, but one that I did see a lot, and it was the first time I'd heard of it, is a story that isn't even published in Shonen Jump called GACHIAKUTA. It's serialized in Kodansha's weekly shonen magazine and has been around for almost 3 years exactly and has 127 chapters to date. A quick summary for the start of the story: it's set in a dystopian world where the population known as the tribe folk, said to be descendants of criminals, live in the shadow and slums of the wealthy society, who throw everything that they deem worthless or unwanted into a wasteland they call the pit. On a side note, when I was first catching up, it reminded me of the 2009 Astro Boy movie, which has the surface and Metro City floating above it. To be honest, I don't know much about the Astro Boy IP, but as far as I'm aware, this movie did make some major differences compared to the original manga. Anyway, our main character is a boy called Rudo who hates the wastefulness of the wealthy, and he often digs through the trash to find stuff he sees value in. And after a day's rummaging, he finds his adoptive father, a man called Regto, on death's door after an attack from an unknown individual, and Rudo finds himself charged with the murder due to some heavy prejudice and is cast into the pit, where there is trash as far as the eye can see, and he gets attacked by a huge beast made of trash before being saved by someone called Engine, and Rudo learns he has an ability to connect with the soul of a precious object, making him what they call a giver. And Engine, the man who saved him, is part of an organization of givers called the Cleaners, or janitors depending on what translation you're reading, who hunt these trash beasts with their own vital instruments. So we are told that Rudo grew up being told by Regto about the idea of a soul forming inside of an object, where someone to connect with it, care for it in a major way, so this forms the foundation for how the givers exist to begin with in this world, and how the previously mentioned vital instruments, or jinki, are made by deliberately forming a connection with a precious object, and they have what is called thought that powers them. It's their energy. It's the same thing that powers the trash beast. So this thought, in my eyes, is essentially sentience, life. So the vital instruments and trash beasts are alive, and with the existence of trash, discarded objects, it begs the question, what happens to the soul of that trash? So back to Rudo, who we've already established sees immense value in such discarded objects. So with that, and a pair of gloves gifted to him by Regto, his unique stance on what has worth makes him completely unique as the only giver who can turn anything into a jinki. So it all revolves around the idea of finding worth and value. Every aspect of it links back to that central theme. You've got the whole city where Rudo is from, the sphere, and the huge divide there, how dehumanizing it is. And I use the word dehumanizing ironically because that same sentiment extends from the people to the inanimate object as well. As soon as it's deemed worthless, unwanted, it's tossed away as if it wasn't even there to begin with. It makes no difference to the people at the top, and our main character goes through exactly that. He was forcefully assigned a purpose. He was labeled a murderer as a quick, easy fix to a problem. That's all his worth amounted to. According to them, he was nothing more than the supposed son of a criminal, and once he'd served that purpose, which was just to be blamed for his own adoptive father's death, he was thrown away. But then we move down to the pit that flips this notion, a place literally built from the very same waste that is thrown from up above, but it's still thriving in its own right. So you can see where this is going. 1 + 1 = 2. Just because something is discarded doesn't mean it no longer holds any value. There is always some form of worth there. And back to the jinki, crucial in reinforcing that idea, weapons forged from the deep personal connection that can manifest powers through those emotions and attachments of the person wielding them. them. An object's history and the meaning that is imbued into them determines their strength, because only you and you alone can truly understand what something means to you. Anything can mean everything to anyone. True worth isn't inherent but comes from the bonds that are formed between people and whatever they hold most dear to them. And I was thinking a lot about this statement, because does everything truly have a worth? Because think about trash, genuine trash that the garbage men come to collect whenever they do. I don't know, it feels like there's a strike every other week now anyway. Does that trash have value? And when you think about it, it does, because you see animals rummaging around in it, finding something for themselves to eat maybe, and there's probably stuff in there that could be composted, there's probably stuff in there that should have been recycled. So I guess even literal trash has value. I feel like the only single thing I can definitively say has no worth whatsoever is paper straws, because fuck paper straws. The types of Jinki expands on that even more, how there is a clear relationship between someone's intentions and the manner in which those abilities manifest. Attacker and defender types, either combative or protective, it depends on the user's mindset and the depth of their bond with the object. And in a world that decided his worth for him, and which we've already established, this concept holds even more significance for Rudo, with him seeing worth in basically everything and anything, which means making anything into a Jinki. And this makes for one of my favorite ways a manga has distinguished its main character from the rest of the crowd, how it's so closely linked to the power system of the story, but also comes down to his personality, his own character. So it's just as much, if not more, due to him, who he is internally, as it is external factors like how this world power system works. It's so easy to look at any part of the story, whether it's the characters, the locations, the world building, the plot, and so on. You could go into so much more detail, what with all the other givers and the cleaners or janitors as a collective group and such. But to move on, the art as well is incredible. The mix of regular manga aesthetics with the graffiti art kind of style, and the sharpness of it that makes the whole thing look so much more dynamic. Whether it was intentional or not, that graffiti feel to it kind of harkens back to those narrative themes of divide, rebellion, worth. You've got Kei Urana, the mangaka, and Hideyoshi Ando, who themselves is a graffiti artist, so there you go. Because the whole thing with the graffiti is like, is it art, is it vandalism, you know, that kind of thing. How graffiti, say, affects the worth of a building or something. It's all so chaotic, but in a good way, freeform. Every panel feels so intense. The line work is thick and rough, gritty almost. The backgrounds are greatly detailed as well, with all of the debris and clutter of the environment. I know it's cliche to say that the art immerses you into the story, but that expression fits really well here. It's got such a distinct look to it that even if it's only subconsciously, you know that you're reading GACHIAKUTA, if that makes sense. I know that's a terrible way to describe it. You're locked in when you're reading. Add the exaggerated motion of the action and the fights. Granted, I have seen some critiques in this area where it becomes a bit too much, the complexity becomes difficult to follow, which at some points I do agree with. But for the most part, it's not a complaint I have personally. The breaking panels and all the overlapping panels I really enjoy. It makes everything feel more forceful to me. The action feels weightier. The character designs as well are really something. The baggy pants, oversized hoodies, spiky hair. I said I wasn't sure if the art linked to the themes of the story was intentional, but now I'm pretty sure it was. It's all done with purpose behind it. Urban fashion gives that kind of outsider vibe, that feeling of rebellion, and while that fashion is more modern, it still works when you put it in front of this broken sort of dystopian landscape, because it's still rugged, it's still disjointed, you know, there's nothing uniform about this. And to add to this, the author is actually a fan of Soul Eater and even worked as an assistant under the same author for Fire Force, so you can maybe see where GACHIAKUTA gets some of its dynamism from. I guess you could say Rudo in a way is like Shinra, because he's an evil looking main character. This all kind of adds to the point that everything is done with intent. There is reason behind each decision made regarding this series, and there's also an anime adaptation in the works scheduled to air sometime this year, I think, and it's produced by Studio Bones. And if their portfolio is anything to go by, then this is very good news. They've produced series like Cowboy Bebop, Mob Psycho, so if they really put in the work, that expressiveness of the manga, that all that movement, action could definitely be translated over. They've also done My Hero Academia, although I think that's kind of a unique case, since even though it was seasonal, the production schedule was more akin to that of a weekly anime, meaning they didn't stop working on it, and you may have heard complaints about the more recent seasons. That may be why that work schedule, but you know, that's neither here nor there. I'm pretty sure that's not applicable here. Essentially, there's a reason to be optimistic for how this anime adaptation will turn out. That said, I will still be watching weekly even if it doesn't turn out that great, because it's worth it. This story is really good. And back to the topic of the next big shonen manga. If this anime is a success, there's a strong chance that will catapult it into the mainstream stardom that so many people, me included, think it deserves.